Okay, welcome to the lecture on plagiarism and how to avoid it, which is, I guess, the most important part here. So, what is plagiarism? Well, the university defines plagiarism as the appropriation of another person's ideas, processes, results, or words without giving appropriate credit. Okay, and I've given you there the university policy from where this is taken. Now, let me be very clear. If you go look up the policy, you will see that this is a serious business that can have consequences that can go from very small, which is like basically failing an assignment or having a reduced grade on an assignment, all the way to being expelled from the university. So that's not good. All right. Okay. So this is an important thing. We're not just interested in this from a purely academic standpoint. There are real life, real world consequences to this. Now, this is a different definition taken from the Harvard Writing Program website, and it's slightly more explicit. And they say, any idea or any language from someone else without crediting the source. And then they say it doesn't matter whether the source is published or another student, a website, as if it's not your work, you are stealing, and it's unacceptable. And this is very interesting, it doesn't matter whether you did it on purpose or by accident. Now, and this may shock you, but we will talk about it, and you will see that they're quite right that intentionality isn't necessarily crucial in determining plagiarism. So we could ask ourselves, why is it wrong? Well, because essentially it's theft. Okay, that is, when you pretend that someone else's ideas or words are yours, you're basically stealing their ideas, and you're lying because you're lying about where the ideas come from. It's one thing to say, I came up with this idea, and it's another thing to say, Joe over there came up with this idea, right? And it's fraud because you're passing other people's work as yours, okay? So these are not good things, which means that plagiarism is ethically and morally wrong. Okay, and moreover, in the applied linguistics program, we take a very severe stance on plagiarism, which means that if we become aware of a plagiarism case, we will prosecute it all the way. So you need to be aware of this. First of all, it's wrong and you shouldn't do it. But then also you should be concerned, because if you want to be in the program and you plagiarize, if we catch you, and we will catch you, you're not going to enjoy it. So, what constitutes plagiarism? Okay. So first of all, and we need to be very clear about this, you can plagiarize not just text, but also ideas. Okay? So it's the use of ideas or the reuse of text verbatim, and verbatim means word by word, without attribution. That's what makes it plagiarism. Okay? Then there is the intention to deceive, which is an aggravating factor. So in other words, let's say that you accidentally plagiarize, and I'm going to explain how that happens. You're still plagiarizing, but remember I said there's a range of punishments for plagiarism. Your punishment will probably be in the low end of the range. On the other hand, if you had the intention to deceive, then probably the punishment will be in the high range of the punishment. So, and again, let's be very clear. You can be plagiarizing without being aware of it. And therefore, and sometimes, students will say, well, I didn't mean to plagiarize. Okay, well, you still did. Having the intention of plagiarizing is not necessary for plagiarism to exist. Why is that? So let's look at this. And First of all, let's talk about the spectrum of plagiarism. This is not my idea. See, I'm attributing my sources here. I took it from this website that's indicated there. And they argue that there's different types of plagiarism. They have, like, I think 9 or something like that. And I recommend that you go take a look because you may realize and say, oh wow, I never even thought that this was a thing. That you could do this. Now, ultimately, though, it's not really that important because it doesn't matter what kind of plagiarism it is. It's still plagiarism. Okay, and so ultimately, if you don't attribute the words or the ideas, or you misattribute them deliberately to give the impression that you've done work that you haven't done, it's still plagiarism. Okay, and as I said before, it will be found out, and bad things will happen. Okay, so now, so we've established that there is a range of plagiarism. Let's look at what these different kinds of plagiarism can be. So first of all, even before we talk about plagiarism, you can reuse pre-existing text in a number of ways. Okay, so here's the 4 basic things that you can do, arranged in order of most dangerous and most sort of severe plagiarism, all the way down to basically not plagiarism. Okay, so the first one is copy and paste, where you literally cut and paste a verbatim quote of an entire sentence, or God help us, an entire paragraph, and maybe like an entire paper, right? If you're caught doing this, that's the most dangerous thing that will get you the most severe punishment. So obviously you shouldn't do it. Okay, but provided you actually acknowledge that you took the entire sentence, then it's okay. Taking an entire paragraph or an entire essay is never okay. Okay, but an entire sentence, that would be acceptable. So then you can do the same copy and paste verbatim quote, but just a few words. Okay, like for example, 3, 4, 5 words, right? Now, and again, this is the thing that sometimes students say, well, I only quoted 3 words. Well, that's still plagiarism. Okay, that is, there is no low end to the plagiarism. Okay, technically there is, but we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, so the first 2 that we saw are literally verbatim, where you take the exact words that the author used and you reuse them. Okay, then there is paraphrasing, which is not verbatim. It's not a cut and paste kind of deal, but basically the content comes from the pre-existing text and the wording is yours. Okay, now there might be a few occasional words that come from the pre-existing text, but the basic idea is that you rephrase, and hence the word paraphrase, you rephrase the ideas of the text and you word them as your own. Now, this is dangerous because it's easy to get confused as to who said what. Okay, and so then if you lose track of were these my ideas or were these the original author that I'm quoting ideas, it can be dangerous, and you can get in trouble again inadvertently. And then finally is when you generally mention an idea or a thought without a specific reference. If you say, Freud introduced the idea of the subconscious, you're not even necessarily quoting a particular book. It's just in Freud's idea. That's not plagiarism, but still it needs an attribution, right? As I just did, I said Freud introduced the idea of the subconscious. If you said, well, the subconscious does this and that, then you should attribute it to Freud, if that's indeed where you got the idea of the subconscious. So, but then the general mention of an idea is usually not plagiarism because it's not a direct reference, but you still should attribute where it came from. Now, what does not constitute plagiarism? Well, is using ideas of verbatim text with an attribution. Okay, so actually plagiarism is very easy to fix. Acknowledge your sources and you're good to go. Okay, Now, another thing is, of course, ideas that are assumed to be universally known. Okay, so if you say Shakespeare died in 1616, okay, everybody knows that. Well, at least lots of people know that. Whether you read it in an encyclopedia or in a textbook or whatever, you don't really need to quote for that, right? Because it's assumed that everybody knows that Shakespeare died in 1616, or that the function of the heart is to pump blood, or that I don't know, the American independence was in 1776, that kind of stuff, right? It's like universally known. Relatedly to this, terms that have entered general knowledge. If you say the contradictions of capitalism, it's Karl Marx. The invisible hand of the market, it's Adam Smith, right? These are things, I have a dream, So these are things that, are part of general knowledge. So even if you don't say, I have a dream, Martin Luther King, it's hard to believe that you plagiarize that, right? Because everybody knows what that source is. Ask not what you can do, what the country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. That kind of thing. You don't need to reference it because everybody knows that it was Robert Kennedy. Yeah. Okay. So if everybody knows it, if it's general knowledge, you don't need to attribute it. Then the other thing that you don't need to attribute is when it's an allusion or a parody or a play on words, like a joke. Okay, so there's an example here, an episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer titled "I, Robot, You, Jane," which is a double allusion to a Asimov short story, I, Robot, and to Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan, the famous "Me, Tarzan, You, Jane," right? So so this is double allusion. You don't put a footnote because that kind of ruins the joke, right? So the idea is that if it's for parodic purposes, or for allusions and that kind of thing, again, it's usually well known enough. Otherwise, the allusion, the parody, don't work. That you don't have to attribute those things. So what does attribution mean? Well, you will recall the whole system of APA, the system of citations, in-text citation, list of references, in part was developed to avoid plagiarism. Okay, so the idea is attribute each separate idea immediately after you use it, or do so clearly before you actually use it. Okay, and it should be clear from the text, from the position of the attribution, which part of a paragraph comes from that author and which part comes from you. And you should always quote enough so that it's clear which is which. Okay? It's not enough to have the author and the book or the article in the work cited and then say, well, but I attributed it, it's in the work cited. No, you have to attribute it in the text. And if it's quoted verbatim, always, 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 no exceptions, immediately after the text, you must cite with the page number, not just the author. It's not enough to say, Karl Marx, Das Kapital, but you need to provide the page number. Okay, that is, it has to be very, very specific reference. So, back to paraphrasing. So we said a minute ago that paraphrase means stating the same idea using different words. So a practice that has emerged in the past, maybe 5-6 years, is called rogeting, from after Roget's thesaurus, of basically changing words in a citation with synonyms to avoid detection. Now, this is because there's software such as Turnitin and these software that detect plagiarism by looking at large databases of papers and articles and so on. Now, maybe rogeting will work, changing words will work with software detection, but it won't work with humans, and we read your papers unlike other programs. So don't even try that, because we'll immediately spot it if you try to do that. Um, so paraphrasing, good. Attribution, good. Close paraphrase, it's dangerous. It's brinksmanship. That is, if your paraphrase is very, very close to the original, you're taking an unnecessary risk. Okay, and because basically plagiarism is when your paraphrase is too close to the original, and it's basically the original. Okay, or you change one word in a 3-line sentence. Okay, that kind of thing falls under plagiarism. So let's look at an example which I have conveniently stolen from the Harvard college writing program. Hey, if it's good enough for Harvard, it's good enough for us. So here you have at the beginning a quote, a long piece of text by Clifford Leach about Romeo and Juliet. And all right, and so then you have a student who plagiarized this, and here's the text. And as you can see in this quote that's plagiarized, the parts in red from the paragraph above have been plagiarized. Okay, and the reason that they're plagiarized is that the student, even though he's quoting, referencing Clifford Leach essay and giving the page number, doesn't say which part he's quoting verbatim. Okay, and so that's what makes it plagiarism in this particular case. Also, the other thing is that all he did was change a few words, mixture instead of amalgam, which means the same thing. Assert a moral lesson, he changed it to the assertion of a moral lesson, changed the impact into force, and so there were a few minor attempts to make it different, but it's clearly not enough, right? And so therefore that makes it plagiarism, and that makes it a problem. Okay, so what would have been a non-paraphrased form of the same thing? Well, so here's, I created this. So your student could have said, Leach 1997 thinks that Romeo and Juliet is a mixture of comedy and tragedy with a moral lesson, which is however directed to the parents of the lovers. Leach 97, page 20. Okay, so notice that moral lesson, because it's 2 words, I attributed, giving a page number, but I did not attribute comedy, tragedy, parents, and lovers because they're general terms and they're 1 word. Okay, and that's what I meant before, that technically 1 word is not going to be plagiarism because 1 word is 1 word, right? So you can't really plagiarize 1 word. But you gotta be careful, because if the word is a technical term that was introduced by the scholar, you still need to acknowledge that the word and the idea came from the scholar. Okay, so if you just copy 1 word, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't attribute. You still need to attribute the ideas. Okay, so you always attribute everything. Okay, so then in the second version of the paragraph, what I did was put in the quotations, right? The quotation marks. So here you have the plagiarized. So if you look at the previous slide, you have the plagiarized version. Here you have the non-plagiarized version of the plagiarized version, in which I put in the quotation marks. However, when you do that, it highlights how very little the student actually wrote in this part. Okay, and that's probably why then the student sort of plagiarizes, because it says, well, if I do it properly by quoting, giving all of my references, it's clear that I didn't do any work. It's clear that all I did was cut and paste, right? And so that's not gonna fly probably with the professor. All right. So, in conclusion, let's look at a few bits of practical advice. I think it's very clear. Plagiarism is ethically and morally bad. It's dangerous because the university will, punish you for plagiarizing. It's considered a violation of student integrity. It's actually easy not to plagiarize by giving references, attributing the ideas and the thoughts and the words that you borrow from somebody. All right? So if you give proper reference, plagiarism is not a problem. And that's what the APA system that we make you learn in this class and in the others does. It helps you avoiding plagiarism. All right, so a little practical advice, and some of this is fairly obvious. First of all, if you don't know, if you're in doubt and say, well, I'm not sure here whether I should quote or not quote or whatever, ask the faculty, right? It's unlikely that the faculty is going to say, go away, I don't want to talk to you, right? If you are in doubt whether you should quote or not, take the original text, put it side by side with your text. If you see more than 2 words in a row that are the same, quote it, right? If you are in doubt whether your paraphrase is too close to be non-plagiarism paraphrase, quote it, and that will solve the problem. If you plagiarized and it comes from being sloppy in your research practice because you are no longer clear as to who said what, and so somehow you say, well, I have here these notes that I took on a piece of paper. It looks like very clever, so I must have said it. You just don't do that, right? Check your sources. Get the source again, look at it carefully, and see what you got from these sources. And finally, if you're plagiarizing as a deliberate attempt to cheat because you think you can fool us, all I got to tell you is think again, okay? We can identify plagiarism just by reading your paper, okay? We don't need software. We just read your paper and we know when you plagiarized. And it takes seconds to check using Google Scholar, that sort of tools. Turnitin, those tools. You could be throwing away your career, academic career, to avoid 5 minutes of work paraphrasing and giving credit. It's just not worth it. Okay, it's just not a smart thing to do. The risk rewards ratio is just wrong. Okay, so even if you don't care that it's morally and ethically wrong, it is not a good idea from a practical standpoint because inevitably you'll get caught and it's not going to be pretty. Anyway, again, if you have any questions, ask the faculty, ask me in this class, whoever is teaching the class, and they will be happy to help you. All right, so good luck. And also, the source that I gave at the beginning, the graduate student academic dishonesty source, is very useful because it's not just plagiarism. There's a bunch of other things that you can do that can get you in trouble. And, I find the students are unaware of most of this. So you should take a look at that, just to know what you shouldn't do. But generally speaking, it's fairly obvious. You don't make anything up, right? But this is a good source to look up, and the Harvard website is also pretty good in terms of defining plagiarism and so on. Also, the Turnitin website is useful, although you have to keep in mind that they're a commercial company that makes money from doing this. So they have an agenda that doesn't necessarily coincide with our agenda at all because they're in it for the money. All right. I hope this was useful, and good luck with your paper.